You can find the story of the strange and unsettling thing that happened to me and my friends in the summer of 2017 all over the internet. If you know where to look. But you'll only find the official version. The one that's been sanitized for public consumption. You'll read about a boating trip, a sudden storm, some property damage, and a group of spooked city kids who overreacted. The police reports, the insurance claims, they all paint a neat and tidy picture. But they don't tell you about the silence. They don't tell you about the weight in the water. And they don't tell you what was waiting for us at the bottom of Lake Lanier. I live in Ohio now. I moved back about 6 months after it happened. I couldn't stand being in Georgia any longer. Couldn't stand the humidity, the way the trees seemed to crowd in on you. And I certainly couldn't stand being anywhere near a large body of water. But back then, in 2017, I was living the dream. Or so I thought. I'd just landed a decent graphic design job in Atlanta, and for a kid from Dayton. It felt like the big time. That's where I met Mike. Mike was a local, born and raised in Gwinnett County. He had that easygoing Southern confidence that a pale, perpetually awkward Midwesterner found both intimidating and fascinating. We worked in the same office building, and we bonded over complaining about the breakroom coffee. He was the one who introduced me to his girlfriend, Sarah, and soon enough, the three of us became a regular weekend crew. It was Mike's idea to go to the lake. The Georgia summer had arrived in full force by late July. A thick, suffocating blanket of heat that made the air shimmer over the asphalt. The city was an oven. We gotta get out on the water. Man, Mike said one sweltering afternoon, leaning back in his office chair. Rent a house on Lanier for the weekend. Get a boat. It'll be perfect. I'd heard of Lake Lanier, of course. It was the spot. The pictures online looked like a postcard. Sprawling blue water. Tree-lined shores. People on speedboats pulling laughing kids on inner tubes. It looked like the absolute pinnacle of summer fun. I remember on the drive up there, a Friday afternoon, we were all in high spirits. The windows were down in Mike's old Ford Explorer, and we were blasting some 90s rock playlist that Sarah had put together. We left the Atlanta skyline behind, and the concrete jungle slowly gave way to rolling hills and dense forests of pine and oak. It was beautiful, peaceful. As we got closer, Mike, in his role as the local guide, started telling us about the lake. You know, this whole thing is man-made, he said, gesturing out the window. They flooded a whole valley back in the 50s to make it. Wow, really? Sarah asked from the back seat. Yeah, he chuckled. There's a whole town down there. Oscarville. Houses, roads, cars, the works. They never cleared everything out. Just let the water cover it up. He said it with a kind of spooky relish. The way you tell a ghost story to kids. Some people say it's haunted. They say the place is cursed. I laughed. Cursed? By what? Ah, you know. He waved a hand dismissively. Local legends. Fishermen's tales. They say the spirits of the people they buried down there get angry. People drown here all the time. Way more than they should. They say hands pull you down from below. He grinned, looking at me in the rearview mirror. So don't go skinny dipping alone at night, Jake. We all laughed it off. It was just a story. A fun, creepy bit of local color to add some flavor to our weekend getaway. At the time, that's all it was. I had no idea about the real history of Oscarville. I didn't know about the racial violence in 1912. The lynchings, the way the entire black community was forcibly driven out. Their land later sold and submerged. Mike didn't mention that part. I don't think he knew. But that knowledge came later. During long, sleepless nights spent staring at my computer screen, trying to make sense of what I couldn't explain. Knowing the truth of that place, it casts a much darker shadow over what happened next. The lake house we rented was at the end of a long, winding gravel road, nestled in a quiet cove. It was a nice A-frame, a little dated, with a big wooden deck that overlooked the water. A private dock jutted out from the shore, where a rented pontoon boat bobbed gently. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. And the water was the first thing that felt off. It wasn't the clear, sparkling blue from the brochures. It was dark, a deep, murky green that faded to black just a few feet from the surface. You couldn't see the bottom, not even in the shallows. But hey, we were in our early 20s and excited for a weekend of freedom. We cracked open some beers, blasted music from a portable speaker, and spent the rest of the afternoon just soaking it all in. The plan was simple: boat all day Saturday, grill out on the deck, and head back to the city Sunday afternoon. It was perfect, normal. The first red flag came that afternoon. It was so small, so insignificant, that it barely registered. I was sitting on the edge of the dock, letting my feet dangle in the water while Mike and Sarah were unloading the coolers. The water was surprisingly cold beneath the sun-baked surface layer. As I swished my feet back and forth, I felt something brush against my ankle. It wasn't the slimy, darting touch of a fish. It was smooth, firm, and cold. Incredibly cold, it felt. For a split second, exactly like fingers. I yanked my feet out of the water so fast I nearly fell backwards off the dock. My heart was pounding. I looked down into the dark water. But there was nothing there. Just my own distorted reflection looking back at me. "You all right, man?" Mike called from the deck. "Yeah, fine," I shouted back, trying to make my voice sound normal. "Just thought something touched my foot. Probably a big ol' catfish," he yelled. "They're like monsters in here. Big as a man." Right, a catfish. That had to be it. I told myself that over and over. A big, smooth-skinned catfish. I forced a laugh and stood up, deciding I'd had enough of the dock for a bit. But I couldn't shake the feeling. It hadn't felt like a fish. It had felt deliberate. That night, after a dinner of burnt hot dogs and cheap beer, we sat out on the deck. The moon was nearly full, and it cast a pale, silvery path across the black water. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. It was serene, but my eyes kept getting drawn back to the water. It was like looking into a void. That's when I heard it. A splash. It came from somewhere out in the middle of the cove. It wasn't the random splash of a jumping fish. It was heavier, more rhythmic. Splash. Drag. Splash. Drag. Like someone, or something, was swimming with a slow, clumsy stroke. I stood up and walked to the railing, peering out into the darkness. "You guys hear that?" I asked quietly. Sarah strained her ears. "Hear what?" "I just hear the crickets." Mike didn't even look up from his phone. "It's the lake. Dude, it makes noises." I listened for another minute. The sound was gone. There was only the crickets and the water against the shore again. The silence that followed felt heavier. Somehow, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. That old, primal feeling of being watched. I scanned the opposite shore. A dark, jagged line of trees against the night sky. Nothing. I told myself Mike was right. It was just the lake. I was letting his stupid ghost stories get to me. But I was the last one to go inside that night. And I made damn sure the sliding glass door was locked behind me. The next day, Saturday, was when things started to properly unravel. We spent the morning out on the pontoon boat, cruising around the main channel of the lake. The sheer size of the place was staggering. It stretched for miles in every direction, with countless fingers and coves branching off. In the bright morning sun, with the engine humming and another terrible 90s playlist blasting, it was easy to forget the unease of the night before. We found a wide open spot, and Mike broke out the inner tube. He went first, then me. It was fun, skipping across the wake, the warm wind in your face. Then it was Sarah's turn. She was a little more hesitant, but we coaxed her into it. Mike took it easy on the turns, keeping the speed manageable. She was laughing, shouting for him to go faster. And then, on a wide turn, she hit a wave at a weird angle and flew off the tube, landing with a splash in the deep water. This was normal. It had happened to both of us. We laughed, and Mike started circling the boat back to pick her up. But as we got closer, we saw she wasn't laughing. Her face was a mask of sheer panic. She was treading water frantically, her eyes wide with terror. "Hurry," she screamed, her voice shrill. "Mike, hurry. Just relax, honey. We're coming," he shouted back, still smiling. No, something grabbed me. It grabbed my leg. The smile vanished from Mike's face. He throttled the engine, and we were beside her in seconds. I reached over the side and hauled her out of the water. She was shaking uncontrollably, sobbing. She collapsed onto the deck of the boat, clutching her ankle. "It pulled me," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Something pulled me under." Mike knelt beside her, his face a mixture of concern and disbelief. What do you mean? What pulled you? I don't know. It was strong. It felt like a hand. It tried to pull me straight down. I looked at her ankle. There, just above the bone, were 5 faint red marks, arranged in a pattern that looked unnervingly like a grip. They weren't scratches. They were more like pressure marks, already starting to fade against her pale skin. Sarah, you probably just got tangled in some seaweed or a submerged branch, Mike said, his voice gentle but firm. There's trees and stuff all over the bottom of this lake. You panicked. That's all. No, she insisted, shaking her head. It wasn't a tree. It was holding me. We tried to calm her down, but the fun was over. The mood on the boat had curdled. Sarah wrapped herself in a towel and refused to even look at the water for the rest of the trip. We headed back to the house in near silence, the sound of the engine seeming offensively loud now. I believed her. I thought back to the cold touch on my own ankle the day before. The red marks on hers looked exactly like how a tight grip would feel. I looked at Mike, expecting to see some flicker of fear in his eyes, some acknowledgement that maybe his ghost stories weren't just stories. But he just looked annoyed, like Sarah was ruining his perfect weekend with hysterics. That evening, the atmosphere was tense. Sarah stayed inside, reading on the couch. Mike was on the deck, sullenly poking at the grill. I couldn't sit still. I needed to do something. I grabbed a fishing rod. I'm not much of a fisherman, but I find the repetitive motion of casting and reeling calming. I walked to the end of the dock and cast my line out into the darkening water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in lurid shades of orange and purple. The water was like glass, reflecting the fiery sky. It was beautiful, but it felt menacing now. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just casting and reeling, the rhythmic motions doing little to soothe my nerves. I kept thinking about Sarah's face, the pure terror in her eyes. Then, I felt a tug on the line. And I don't mean a nibble. This was an instantaneous, violent yank that nearly pulled the rod out of my hands. My fisherman's instincts, what little I had, kicked in. I braced my feet, tightened my grip, and leaned back. This thing was strong, incredibly strong. I've caught decent-sized bass before, and this was nothing like that. There was no fight, no thrashing side to side. It was just a dead, heavy, impossible weight, pulling straight down. It felt like I had hooked the bottom of the lake itself. Mike, I grunted, struggling to keep the rod from snapping. Mike, get over here. I've got something huge. He looked over from the grill. His interest finally peaked. No kidding? Reel it in. I'm trying. I strained, my muscles burning. It feels like I hooked a car. The drag on my reel was screaming as the line spooled out, pulled down into the black depths. I was putting all my weight into it, my knuckles white on the cork handle. For about 30 seconds, it was a stalemate. Me, on the dock, and whatever was on the other end of that line, deep in the water below. It wasn't moving. It was just holding, anchored. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the line went slack. The sudden lack of tension sent me stumbling backwards. Whoa! I caught my balance and quickly started reeling, thinking the fish had just run towards me. But there was no weight at all. I reeled and reeled until the lure, a silver spinnerbait, came flying out of the water and clattered onto the dock. The lure was fine, but the heavy-duty, 50-pound test braided line attached to it was gone. Not broken, not frayed. It was cut, sheared off as cleanly as if someone had taken a pair of surgical scissors to it. About a foot of line was left, hanging limply from the lure. I stared at it, my mouth hanging open. Mike walked over, peering at the severed line. What the hell? Must have been a big old gar. They've got sharp teeth, or maybe it snagged on some sheet metal or something from an old building down there. He was trying to rationalize it. We both were, but I knew what I felt. The dead, unmoving weight, the sheer power of it. As I stood there, staring at the cleanly cut line, I looked down into the water. The last rays of sunlight were fading, and the surface was turning from murky green to impenetrable black. And for a fraction of a second, I saw it. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a log. It was a shape, a pale, whitish shape, deep under the surface. It was long and vaguely humanoid. And as I watched, my heart frozen in my chest, it seemed to recede, to sink back down into the absolute darkness until it was gone. I blinked, and there was nothing, just the black water. I didn't say anything to Mike. What could I say? That I thought I saw a ghost swimming away? He'd think I was as crazy as he thought Sarah was. But I knew what I saw. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very core, that what had grabbed my line wasn't a fish. It was the same thing that had grabbed Sarah's ankle. And it was still down there. The night came on fast after that. A bank of dark clouds rolled in from the west, swallowing the moon and stars. The wind began to pick up, whistling through the pine trees and whipping the lake into a choppy mess. The forecast had called for possible thunderstorms, and it looked like we were in for a big one. We ate our grilled chicken in a tense silence inside the house. Sarah was quiet, still shaken. Mike was trying to pretend everything was normal, making bad jokes that fell flat. I was just pushing food around on my plate, my mind replaying the image of that pale shape sinking into the blackness. Every gust of wind against the windows made me jump. Around 10 p.m., the storm hit. It wasn't a normal thunderstorm. It was a full-blown southern tempest. The rain came down in solid sheets, so loud on the roof it was like we were inside a drum. The wind howled, and every few seconds, a flash of lightning would illuminate the thrashing trees and the furious, white-capped water of the cove in a stark, terrifying snapshot. Then, the power flickered, once, twice, and then it went out completely, plunging us into absolute darkness and silence, save for the roar of the storm outside. Great, Mike muttered. He fumbled for his phone, turning on its flashlight. The small beam cut a nervous path through the pitch-black living room. Sarah let out a little whimper. "It's okay," Mike said, his voice trying for reassuring but failing. "It's just the storm. Power goes out all the time out here. I'll find some candles." He found a few decorative candles on the mantelpiece and managed to get them lit. Their flickering, dancing light cast long, monstrous shadows on the walls, making the cozy A-frame feel like a cavern. We sat there, huddled together in the living room, listening to the symphony of the storm. And that's when we heard the new sound. It was faint at first, almost lost beneath the sound of the rain and wind. It was a scraping sound, a rhythmic scrape. 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 Coming from the direction of the deck. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "It's probably just a branch blowing against the house," Mike said, but he didn't sound convinced. He was staring at the large sliding glass door that led to the deck. The scraping stopped. We all held our breath, straining to hear over the storm. Then we heard a different sound. A wet, heavy thump against the wooden deck. It was followed by a dragging sound. A slow, wet schlump. Schlump. Like something heavy and waterlogged being dragged across the planks. My blood ran cold. I knew that sound. It was the sound I had imagined when I heard the clumsy swimming the night before. "Mike," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "There's something out there." He didn't answer. He just stood up, grabbing the heavy 3D cell maglite he kept in his car. He walked slowly, cautiously, towards the sliding glass door. "Mike, don't," Sarah pleaded. He ignored her. He was the man of the house, the protector. He had to look. He wiped the condensation from the glass with his sleeve and peered out into the maelstrom. "I don't see anything," he said, his voice tight. "It's pitch black out there." He raised the maglite and flicked it on. A powerful, focused beam of white light cut through the rain and the darkness, illuminating the deck and the dock beyond. At first, we saw nothing but the wind-lashed rain and the swaying trees. The beam swept across the deck, past the grill, and towards the dock, and then it stopped. The beam froze, and we all saw it. It was at the edge of the dock, right where it met the land. It was hunched over, its back to us, in the stark, unforgiving light of the flashlight. Its skin was a pale, sickly white, like a grub, and it glistened with water. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but wrong, terribly wrong. Its limbs were too long, too thin, bending at angles that seemed unnatural. It was hairless and gaunt, its spine a knobby ridge visible through its translucent-looking skin. It was pulling on something. With slow, relentless tugs, it was pulling a mooring cleat, the metal fitting used to tie up the boat, straight out of the wooden dock. The scraping sound we heard was the splintering of the wood. We were all frozen, paralyzed by a sight so impossible our brains couldn't process it. It was like watching a nightmare come to life. As we stared, horrified, it must have sensed the light. It stopped pulling on the cleat. Slowly, jerkily, it began to turn its head towards the house. Towards us. And the worst part, the image that has burned onto the inside of my eyelids forever, is that it didn't have a face. Where a face should have been, eyes, a nose, a mouth, there was nothing. Just a smooth, blank, concave expanse of pale skin. A featureless void. Sarah's scream broke the spell. It was a raw, guttural shriek of pure terror that was swallowed by the storm. The thing on the dock reacted to the scream. It dropped the cleat and straightened up to its full, unnerving height. It was tall, at least 6.5 feet, but unnaturally slender, and it started moving towards the house. It didn't walk, it loped, its long limbs moving in a grotesque, spider-like gait across the deck. Mike screamed something, a jumble of curses, and fumbled with the lock on the sliding door, making sure it was secure. The thing reached the glass door in 2 loping strides. We had a momentary, horrifying, close-up view of its blank face, pressed against the glass. Before Mike jumped back, there was a loud, wet thump as it slammed its body against the door. The entire frame rattled. Panic. Pure, animal panic. We scrambled away from the door, falling over furniture in the flickering candlelight. Thump. Another impact, harder this time. A spiderweb of cracks appeared in the corner of the glass. And then we heard more sounds. From the side of the house. From the back, a wet dragging sound, a scraping against the siding. It wasn't just one. There were more of them. They were surrounding the house. The doors. I yelled, my voice cracking. We have to barricade the doors. The next hour was a blur of adrenaline-fueled terror. We dragged the heavy sofa in front of the sliding glass door. We shoved a bookshelf against the front door. We ran through the house, making sure every window was locked, pulling the curtains shut as if not seeing them would make them disappear. All the while, we could hear them, the scraping on the walls, the occasional heavy thud against a window frame, the wet, dragging sounds of their movement, a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. There was no plan. There was no rational thought. We huddled together in the center of the living room, as far from any exterior wall as possible. Mike was holding the now useless maglite like a club. Sarah was weeping silently. I was just staring into the darkness, listening, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. We were trapped, miles from anywhere, in a house surrounded by things that shouldn't exist. Things that had crawled out of the black, cursed water of the lake. We stayed like that all night. The sounds eventually subsided as the storm began to pass. But none of us dared to move. We just waited, listening to the drip of the rain and the frantic beating of our own hearts. Waiting for the sun to rise. I don't think I have ever wanted to see the dawn so badly in my entire life. And when it came, it felt like a resurrection. The first faint, gray light filtering through the edges of the curtains was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Slowly, cautiously, we crept to the windows. The rain had stopped. The wind was gone. The lake was calm again. A placid, misty mirror. Mike, with a deep breath, moved the sofa and looked out the sliding glass door. The deck was a mess. The grill was knocked over. The wooden railing was splintered in one spot, and the heavy metal mooring cleat from the dock had been ripped out completely, leaving a jagged hole. And all over the deck, in the damp film left by the rain, were tracks. They weren't human. They weren't from any animal I had ever seen. They were long, vaguely 3-toed, and looked almost like they were webbed. They led from the direction of the water, all over the deck, up to the walls of the house, and then back down to the water's edge, where they disappeared. We didn't talk. We didn't try to explain it. We just started moving. We threw our belongings into our bags, not bothering to fold anything. We left the food in the fridge, the wet towels on the floor. We loaded the car in a terrified, silent rush, constantly glancing over our shoulders at the dark, still water. The drive back to Atlanta was the quietest car ride of my life. The 90s rock playlist was not resurrected. No one spoke a single word. We just stared out our own windows, lost in our own private horror. When Mike dropped me off at my apartment, I said, "I'll see you at work on Monday." He just nodded, his face pale and drawn. He couldn't meet my eyes. We never really talked about it again. We tried, once. A week later, he called me and said, about the lake. We were all just tired. And the storm. It played tricks on our eyes. I knew he was trying to convince himself. Not me. I just said, yeah, man, the storm. But something was broken. Our friendship, built on easy laughs and shared complaints, couldn't bear the weight of what we had seen. It just fizzled out. I heard he and Sarah broke up a few months later. I quit my job not long after that and moved back to Ohio. I couldn't do it. I couldn't live there, knowing what was just an hour's drive away, hidden beneath the surface of that beautiful, terrible lake. The official report, the one the lake house owner filed with his insurance, listed the damage as severe vandalism, likely storm-related. The police came. They took a look around. They found the tracks. They wrote them off as unidentifiable, probably from a bear or some other large animal disoriented by the storm. They found nothing. Of course, they found nothing. The evidence had already slipped back into the water. People still go to Lake Lanier. Every summer, every weekend. It's packed. They ski. They fish. They swim. They have a great time. Their kids splash in the shallows. I see their pictures on social media sometimes, and a cold dread washes over me. They post pictures of themselves smiling, giving a thumbs up from the deck of a pontoon boat, with the dark, placid water behind them, and all I can do is stare at that water and think about what's underneath. I think about the flooded town of Oscarville, the houses and roads still intact in the cold, lightless depths. I think about the cemeteries they never moved, the gravestones that are now covered in silt and slime. The official records say that over 700 people have died in Lake Lanier since it was created. They call them accidents, drownings, boating mishaps. But I know better. I know what's down there. I know what pulls you under when you're all alone. I know what comes out when the storms roll in. And sometimes, on quiet nights here in Ohio, 1,000 miles away, when the rain is hitting my window just right, I can still hear it. A wet, dragging sound, and I have to get up and check to make sure my doors are locked.